Click the bell icon to get latest videos from Ekeeda.
Hello friends, we'll be learning about how we can prepare the specimen of trial balance, what are the methods that are used for preparation of trial balance, and certain categories of ledger accounts what we'll be going through when we have to prepare trial balance. So to start with, as we already know that trial balance has been prepared or is prepared with a specific reason to find out the arithmetical accuracy, to help locate errors, and to help prepare financial statements or accounts of statements like profit and loss account, ledger accounts, and balance sheet with error-free notifications, so that all these statements can be provided to the external and internal users and they can make decisions which is for the betterment of the company. For external users, when we talk about investors or probably lenders, suppliers, they require this information to make sure that their investment is going to be worth enough when it comes to returns on their investments. And for internal users, these information prove to be useful when we talk about these information giving out policy making decisions. So this statement of account has to be error-free, and to make it error-free, we need to have trial balance in place. Now, when we talk about preparation of trial balance, it is always necessary that the journals and ledgers are placed in the correct order. When we talk about journal entries, when we talk about ledger creations, they have to be error-free. In case if there are certain errors which we mentioned about in the earlier video, like wrong totaling, wrong posting, or wrong debit and credit being made, such errors can be rectified when it comes to preparation of trial balance. If at all these errors are missed out, these errors will be then rectified in the profit and loss account preparation or balance sheet preparation. However, we need to try that the trial balance is completely error-free and that all these errors which we try to miss out in the later stage will be identified in the first stage itself and they are mitigated to all possible causes. Now, when we talk about preparation of trial balance, there is a specific format that we need to follow. As I have earlier mentioned, that this is a 4-column format, which first consists of accounts title, ledger folio, debit balance or debit amount, credit balance or credit amount. So this is a specific format that we'll be using whenever you need to prepare any trial balance in near future. So understand this format which has been mentioned down here. I'll be explaining you what you need to understand or what you need to mention in this specific format. So as I've underlined few notifications here or few terms here, one being account title. The account title holds the ledger posting or the ledger postings what we have done. The title which has been mentioned in the ledger, the opening name of the ledger will be always mentioned on the account title category. So when we mentioned about the names, as I've mentioned a cross mark here, here is something we'll be mentioning the account title. Now, when it comes to ledger folio, we have ledger pages what we mentioned. Each ledger folio has a specific number. That number can be mentioned here. If you have that number in the question, you can mention it or else you can keep it blank. Now, every account title has either a debit balance or the credit balance depending on the nature of the ledger it is. So if it is an asset, it will always have a debit balance. If it is a liability, it will have a credit balance. If it is an expense, it will have a debit balance. If it is an income, it will have a credit balance. If it is a profit, it will have a debit balance. If it is a loss, it will have a credit balance. So when we talk about any ledger posting, it has to be mentioned as per the accounts. So the amounts will be placed in the underlined, probably the cross marks that I've made under red. Debit amount will be mentioned under the debit column. Credit amount will be mentioned under the credit column. Every trial balance will have a notification at the start of it, which will state trial balance of Messrs. XXX Limited as of 31st March or whichever date which has been mentioned in the question. That will be always mentioned at the top of the preparation of ledger balance, which has been mentioned rightly here. So Once this trial balance is preferred or prepared, you need to understand that the debit column and the credit column should always tally. So, if the debit column and the credit column of the trial balance is not tallied, that means there is a certain error which has been mentioned or which we have missed out while preparation of trial balance. Now, the reason why this trial balance is prepared is to ensure that there is no error. So once we have identified the error, we need to check whether the journal entries are correctly mentioned, whether the ledger postings have been correctly done. If we do not find any error, that means whether there is an error in the totaling of the trial balance accounting. So we need to find the errors and we have to rectify those errors so that the trial balance can be error free and the same can be forwarded for preparation of statement of accounts, that is profit and loss account and balance sheet. Now that we have understood the specimen that has to be prepared, let us understand what kind of methods do we have when it comes to preparation of trial balance. We have basically three methods which will be used for preparation of trial balance. The first one being total method, the second one being balances method, the third one being total cum balances method. We'll be talking about each of these methods in depth now. The first method, as we have discussed, is the totals method. Under this method, what we need to figure out is that the total of the ledgers, that means the debit total and the credit total, will be mentioned in this specific trial balance. Whatever total we have, despite the balance, we need to understand that when it comes to totals method, the balance which has been mentioned on the debit side and the credit side, both will be carried forward and will be mentioned in the trial balance. The ledger posting, supposingly, if we have 10 different ledgers which has been opened up, so the debit balance will be mentioned on the debit side, the credit balance will be mentioned on the credit side. I'll be giving you certain examples which will clarify how a total method has been prepared when it comes to preparation of trial balance. So for now, for you to understand, just make sure that the debit balance and the credit balance both are mentioned in the totals method. Once this method has been used, the total of the debit side and the credit side should tally. If it doesn't, that means there is certain error. Now, when we talk about totals method, this is not the most favorable method that has been used. To the contrary, this is the least possible method that will be used in preparation of trial balance. So this is just an information that you need to understand or you need to process within your mind that this method will not be used when it comes to preparation of trial balance. However, it is one of the method which can be used to prepare the trial balance statement. The second common method, as I have stated, the second common method which has been used or has been used by all the chartered accountants, all the preparation of financial statements, will be balances method. Under this method, the balance under each ledger account will be carried forward and will be mentioned in the trial balance statement. On the contrary, as compared to the total method where the debit and credit, both the totals are mentioned, under this method only the balance which is pending in the ledger account will be mentioned either on the debit side or on the credit side of the trial balance, depending on the nature of the account title that we have. So if we have asset, the debit balance will always be mentioned in the trial balance. If we have a liability, the credit balance of that specific liability will be mentioned on the credit side of the trial balance statement. So to talk about the third method, again, which is a rarely used method, is total cum balances method. Under this method, we need to prepare 4 columns. So there will be additional 2 columns which will be prepared on the left hand side or either on the right hand side of the debit column and the credit column which has been mentioned. So as we have prepared here, we have debit total and credit total when it comes to the third method, that is total cum balances method. In the first 2 columns, we'll be mentioning the total of the balance in the ledger. So that means the debit total and the credit total of that specific ledger will be mentioned here. And the balances as per that specific ledger account will be mentioned either on the debit side or on the credit side, whichever the nature is as per the account title. So If there is an asset balance, for example, if the debit side of the asset has 20,000, if the credit side of the asset has 10,000, so 20,000 will be mentioned on the debit side, 10,000 will be mentioned on the credit side, and the balance of 10,000 will be mentioned either on the debit side or on the credit side, depending on the nature of the statement or the nature of the ledger that we are using in the statement. So this method is known as total cum balances method. Out of these three methods, the most common used method will be the balances method, which has been used since ages to prepare the trial balance. The other two methods are only for your information. However, if the question suggests that you need to prepare by either of this way, you use the balances method. Or if the question has already mentioned the kind of method you have to use, you can go with that specific method. So when it comes to specifications or specimen of a trial balance, we have three core methods. One being the total method, second being the balances, and the third being the total cum balances method. So the most commonly used is the balances method, which we'll be learning in the next video. We'll be having certain sums which we'll be preparing on the basis of the statements or on the basis of the ledger account what we have, and the provided details will be mentioned in the trial balance. To give you certain examples, we have a different sheet here where we'll be mentioning the details of different ledger accounts that we have and the balances that they hold. So let's go ahead and see what are the ledger accounts that we have mentioned in the trial balance and what balances do they hold. So we have examples of ledger accounts which will be posted in the trial balance. As you have mentioned, there are different lists of ledger balances and the balance that they hold on the contrary. So to give you an example, we have capital account. This account will always have a credit balance. As you can see, the amount XX has been mentioned on the credit side. Hence, this specific account will always have a credit balance. The second one is assets. Assets will include fixed assets. So, fixed asset or current asset will be mentioned on the debit side. For example, if you have land, if you have plant and machinery, it will be mentioned on the debit side of the trial balance. Next one is cash in hand. So when we talk about cash in hand, the actual cash that you have for the inflow and outflow of all the business transactions will be mentioned on the debit side of the trial balance. On the contrary, we have cash in bank, which is the amount that we have mentioned in the passbook or the account that we hold or the amount that we hold in our bank account will be mentioned again on the debit side of the trial balance. Now, we have debtors. The secondary name for debtors will be sundry debtors if we have to mention the trial balance. You can either use debtors or you can either use sundry debtors, which will reflect for the same account. Now, when you use sundry debtors, you need to understand there are many debtors in your trial balance. That means you have classified them under the category of sundry debtors, and the total of all the debtors will be mentioned in the sundry debtors account. That will again have a debit balance as we have mentioned in the sheet here. The next example is bills receivable. The amount that we are supposed to receive is an asset for us, is something that we are supposed to receive as an income. Hence, bills receivable will also have a debit balance here. Now, the stock of raw material and the stock of finished good are the two kind of different examples that we have mentioned here. Again, stock being the opening one, or the stock of raw material or the stock of finished good will always have a debit balance. Hence, we see the amount being mentioned on the debit side of the trial balance here. Now, sales. Sales is an income that we have for us. So when we talk about sales, we talk about the income that we receive. That means income, which always has a credit balance, will always show on the credit side of the trial balance. Whereas on the contrary, sales return is something that we have got in return. That means if we have made a sale of rupees 10,000, out of which 5,000 have been returned back by the customer, that means the stock has come back to us. Now, when we did sales, it had credit balance. That's why sales return will always have a debit balance here. Similarly, when we have purchases, purchase is an expense. Expense will always have a debit balance. So, purchases will also have a debit balance in the trial balance system. On the contrary, when we talk about purchase return, it has a regular effect. But in the introspective way, when we talk about purchase having a debit balance, so purchase returns will have a credit balance as rightly mentioned in the sheet. The other expenses that we have like salaries and expenses, all these things are expenses for any business firm. As we have already mentioned earlier, that expenses will have a debit balance, hence salaries and expenses will have debit balance, which will be mentioned in the trial balance on the debit side. Liabilities, as you know, always has a credit balance, as this is something that we need to repay to our lenders, to our suppliers. Hence, all the liabilities which has been mentioned in the ledger account or which you have categorized as liabilities under ledger account will be having a credit balance here. Income again being something that we are supposed to receive as a credit balance. Hence, it has the credit side or it has taken over the credit side of the trial balance. And the last part being drawing, which is reduction in the owner's capital or the reduction in the owner's good which he has brought into the business. So if anything that has been withdrawn by the owner for his personal use, which we have classified earlier as drawing, will always have a debit balance. So these are certain examples of the ledger balances which will be mentioned in the trial balance. Now we'll be studying further about how a specific trial balance is prepared considering the ledger balances that are provided into the question. So when we talk about providing ledger balances, we'll be having complete ledger account for which we'll have a specific format, and that format will be used for preparation of trial balance under three methods. We'll be studying all three methods in the next video, that is total methods, balances method and totals cum balances method as per the specification that is provided into the ledger account. So this was all about how the specifications or the specimen of trial balance is prepared with the details or examples of ledgers which can be posted in a trial balance. Do make sure that all these trial balance preparation is error free and all the errors which could have been identified in the first instance will be cleared out in the first instance, and then an error free trial balance is prepared. The core most important thing when it comes to preparation of trial balance, that means the total of debit side and the credit side should always tally. The debit side of the trial balance and the credit side of the trial balance should be tallied at any cost. In case if there is an error, that means there is certain tally issue or probably posting or ledger issue which hasn't been rectified, and the same has to be rectified to make sure that an error-free trial balance is prepared and can be provided further for preparation of statement of accounts. So this was all about specimen of trial balance. Thank you for watching this video. Keep subscribing to Ekeeda.